Let's start from that Lend-Lease question. Congress adopted the so-called Lend-Lease program, which will allow Joe Biden to more efficiently supply weapons to Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit detail what is it and how can it help Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much, and it's great to see you. And I really wish all the best for everyone in Ukraine. These are terrible, terrible times. So I'm glad to see that the Congress and President Biden work together to create this renewed Lend-Lease program. The basic idea is it gives additional authority to the president to take existing U.S. military stockpiles and ship them to Ukraine, and then worry about backfilling behind them in our own inventories later. So it gives him a lot more ability to move equipment, arms, ammunition more quickly. It's similar to what we did with the UK before World War II, before we entered World War II. So it's a program that has some opportunity, I think, to accelerate the support for Ukraine.
NATO and its allies refused to close the sky over Ukraine, but as far as I understand, the question to allow Ukraine to close the sky by itself, by Ukrainian pilots, if they are provided with Western aircraft, is still on the table. Do you believe that this political decision will be taken?
I do. I think ultimately it will be. People see several things changing on the ground in Ukraine. One of them is the withdrawal of Russian forces, ground forces from the West. So there's a bit more security for aircraft or facilities there. Second, the atrocities, the absolute horrific attacks and brutal murder and torture of the civilian population. I think that has caused people to look again at what we are doing and see what more we can do. So I have not heard anything specific on the MiG-29s yet, but I do remain optimistic that that eventually will get done.
What's your general vision of the situation on the battlefield at the moment? What is your assumption of Ukrainian and Russian forces' positions, strengths, and chances?
Yeah, so the Russian forces are in disarray. They have had significant losses, personnel, equipment. Their command and control is in poor shape. Their logistics are in poor shape. And so it's quite a credit to the Ukrainian forces that they stopped the initial Russian invasion as it came towards Kiev or Kharkiv or Sumy or Chernihiv or Odessa. They stopped it. They cut the supply lines. They were then able to attack the Russian forces successfully. And the Russians have had no choice but to withdraw their forces and try to regroup. As they regroup, and they will regroup in eastern Ukraine, they intend to accelerate attacks in Donbas. And I think they would like to take all of Donbas before May 9th so they can claim a victory. But their forces are not in good shape. If you put reservists and conscripts into existing units where they have not trained, if you're dealing with now second-rate equipment rather than the better equipment, the same command and control problems, it doesn't look good for the Russian forces to achieve even those limited objectives. In the meantime, Ukraine needs all the help it can get from the West for different types of equipment, including artillery, including armored vehicles, including tanks, in order to be able to advance and retake and hold Ukrainian territory where they can push the Russians out. So I think this is a moment of a pivot in the conflict in Ukraine's favor. And it's important that the West lean in to give Ukrainian forces all the equipment that we can.
It is clear now that Putin's first plan to take over Ukraine easily failed. Do you think he has a plan at all now, or he will try to do anything he will be able to do?
Well, I think what he's trying to do is take over eastern Ukraine to connect from Crimea through Mariupol to Donbas to Rostov in Russia, and then also north to east of Kharkiv. So he's trying to carve out this contiguous area of territory. And then he'll try to claim that he has been successful and that this is a victory for Russia. And then he'll keep fighting anyway. I don't believe that he intends to stop. So that, I think, is the current plan. I don't believe, frankly, that they can achieve this plan. I think that they will have a hard time taking all that territory in Donbass. The Ukrainians will be fighting back and particularly trying to push them out of areas that they have newly occupied. And I think it's going to continue for some time, but there's a bit more momentum on Ukraine's side at the moment.
What do you think was Putin's mistake at the very beginning?
Oh, there are so many. So first off, he overestimated the quality of Russian forces. Second, he underestimated the quality of the Ukrainian forces. He underestimated the determination and the resolve and the bravery of the Ukrainian people. He underestimated the willingness of the West to assist Ukraine. And he underestimated the willingness of the West to impose crippling sanctions on Russia, including the financial system, the banks, and now apparently increasingly the energy sector will be targeted as well. So he made so many miscalculations. I think this has to do with the fact that he's a dictator. People are afraid to tell him the truth. So when he has a vision of a Russian empire where Ukrainians are just mini Russians, no one has the courage to tell him, sir, that's just simply not true. The Ukrainians are a state, they're a people, they're a nation, they're going to fight. When he is told that, oh, we have the best military in the region, we have this wonderful modern military, no one has the honesty to tell him that, well, actually, it's not very good, it's poorly trained, the equipment doesn't work, and a lot of money was siphoned off by the generals to their dachas and their yachts. So he's not getting a fair picture of the reality, and I think that also contributed to his bad decision-making.
You know that yesterday Putin's ally, his bureaucrat Medvedev, told that they are going to build Russian empire from Lisbon to Vladivostok. So he is trying to threaten the whole world now. Do you believe that he's trying to engage United States, NATO, and the world as a whole into the conflict?
No, I think he is just speaking into the wind. It's a frenzied atmosphere now of war fever in Russia, and Medvedev wants to show that he's a part of it. But I don't think there's anything serious about those comments.
Sometimes Putin acts like he's irrational, and it seems to be like an agony of his regime. Do you feel like that, or it's an illusion?
I think a little bit irrational, because he's driven by this vision of empire, and that's causing him to make bad calculations. But then also it's not fully irrational, because it's also based on the fact that he has very bad information about the world, about Russia, about Ukraine, about what's going on. So it's a combination of the two, bad information and irrational decisions even with that.
What's your personal opinion? How long the war would last?
It's impossible to answer the question. The Russians have better supply lines in the east than they had in the north around Kyiv or Chernihiv, so they can supply their forces better, perhaps. We don't know what will happen with the Russian economy. We don't know what the generals and the intelligence leaders will do as they see that Russia's military continues to suffer defeats. So it could be that something snaps in Russia fairly quickly. It could be a matter of weeks, or it could go on for months and months as Russia just continues to dig in and try to take and hold this territory in the east.
Do you believe in the diplomatic track efforts? You yourself were inside the diplomatic process when the question was about Donbass, and at the end of the day, that diplomatic efforts to settle the conflict had no result. Do you believe that diplomatic efforts can give any result now?
Well, diplomacy works when the correlation of forces on the ground creates the conditions for diplomacy. And going back to when I was negotiating about the war in Donbass, we were trying to get enough support to Ukraine, Javelin missiles, sanctions on Russia, and so forth, so that Russia would see that there was no point to continuing the war. We never got far enough, and we didn't succeed there. So the diplomacy never worked because Russia had no incentive to actually reach an agreement. We're in a similar but more highly escalated phase right now. Russia still thinks that it can achieve something militarily, so it's not taking these negotiations seriously. It's not actually setting any goals that it wants, that it would accept if given in negotiations. So the correlation of forces still has to change. Russia has to be defeated more in Ukraine and forced to pull back so that diplomacy becomes its best option.
And do you think that that idea with safety guarantees to Ukraine by a dozen of countries like United States, Great Britain, Turkey, and Russia itself can work?
Well, I'm skeptical, to be honest, that in the long run, that's a good solution. In the short run, in order to be part of a package of ending the war and removing Russian forces from Ukraine, I think it's a good idea. But I think that we've seen with the Budapest memorandum that those types of security guarantees did not work. And with these security guarantees that are done separately, they need to have credibility. They need to be as ironclad as NATO's Article 5 commitment is. And I think we've yet to see anything like that. So it's a good idea to put that out there now. But in the end, I'm a little skeptical that they will be sufficient. Putin has this determination to eliminate Ukraine. And we have to do everything possible to make sure that Ukraine is never attacked or savaged this way again. And this may require stronger guarantees.
And my last question is about NATO. As a former representative of United States to NATO, what is your attitude now towards both what NATO does in the military sense, in the sense of military support, and in the sense of future membership of Ukraine in NATO?
Yeah, well, this is a good question. This is a good question to end on because I think it brings together a lot of the pieces here. First off, NATO has done an outstanding job when it comes to defending itself. Poland, Baltic states, Romania, the questions of commitment, of deployment of forces and so forth, all that's great. But NATO has done almost nothing with respect to Ukraine. It has been individual allies, United States, Poland, United Kingdom, Canada, etc. Individual allies, Czech Republic, they have provided support to Ukraine, but NATO has not. And I think this is something that NATO needs to really think hard about. Is it interested in security in Europe? Is it committed to crisis management in Europe or not? And that's something that I think is still in the air. It's not resolved. And then finally, this comes to the question of Ukraine and NATO membership. I think what we've learned from the war here is that there must not be gray zones in Europe. They are places that Putin can prey upon. So we have to actually close the gray zones. And in my mind, that means we should be looking at NATO membership for Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova, and ultimately Belarus if they change their regime. But NATO is not at that stage of thinking yet. But I think that's the long-term answer. We can only do that if we have a Russia that we can work with, meaning that Putin is no longer in power, Russia's defeated in Ukraine, and there's a new stability in Europe. And then we can try to build longer-term security. And finally, this is not directed against Russia. We have no complaints with the Russian people. We want to see Russia live in a democracy as well, to be prosperous, to be safe. But that requires having a different kind of regime than what we have under Vladimir Putin. With Putin, we have a dictatorship, we have aggression against its neighbors, we have hostility toward the rest of the world, and that we have to firmly oppose.
Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your time.